Welcome back, everyone. Beth Brown and Andy Spears, our guests tonight, as we ask the question, do Tennessee schools receive enough funding? We've got some callers calling in. We appreciate it. Hold right there. Before the break, I teased a little bit, Beth. Let's say money wasn't an issue, and you have your wish list. Tell me what you would do with that money. Where would you spend it?
So the first thing that I would do is make sure that every school in the state of Tennessee has a nurse and a counselor. We know that physical and mental health is of utmost importance, and those needs are only increasing. I would make sure that every school has adequate technology, has textbooks, current textbooks. I would make sure that our education support professionals and our educators are earning a professional wage so that they can actually afford to stay in the profession and that we can attract the best and brightest into the profession. I would make sure that all of our schools are safe and clean and up to code, that we don't have roofs that leak and we don't have mold growing on walls. That's where I would start.
Yeah, that's just a start, tip of the iceberg, which makes sense. I think most people would say that is reasonable, but how much would that cost? And where are we right now? You know, we talked about being 46th in spending per student. What is our per pupil spending right now? Do we have a figure for that? Either of you can answer.
Yeah, so I can tell you that the state spends about generates $7,400 per student through our funding formula. Mm-hmm. I can tell you that there's not a single school district in the state of Tennessee that can operate on $7,400 per student. Our actual spending on average in Tennessee is about $10,200 per student, and to get to the Southeast region average, we would need $10,900. So there's a huge difference in what's being generated by our funding formula and the state contribution than what it's actually taking to operate our school systems. And Rhori, what's upsetting about that is the state is sitting on piles and piles of cash and passing along that burden to our citizens and our taxpayers when the state can and should do more.
Yeah, and you even said in a statement after Governor Lee issued his proposal that long before even the pandemic hit, we were already suffering under a plague of chronic underfunding. We hear a lot about this broken funding formula. Explain that.
Well, Andy, you want to?
Yeah, I'll go.
Sure, Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, so back in 2008, Governor Bredesen adopted a formula called BEP 2.0. It was an update to the BEP, the first time it had really been updated outside of a court order in a long time. And so the BEP started back in 1992. The Governor Bredesen updated it in 2008, and then we had the Great Recession. The second part of that story is that when Bill Haslam became governor, he stopped that formula. That funding formula alone would mean about $1 billion more in funding for schools. And so that was an update. It dealt with the realities of the number of at-risk kids, the number of ESL kids, the fact that we need school nurses, and we're way off on terms of counselors. So the other thing that happened very recently was TASER, which is a bipartisan group of legislators, did an analysis of school funding and basically found what Beth was talking about. Every district hires more teachers than the BEP fund. So we have 12,000 teachers that are paid for outside the BEP. Just to make up that deficit alone, in terms of teachers, we would need $1.7 billion. Now, the good news is we have more than $3 billion sitting around waiting to be spent. So we can make up that gap, but we haven't kept up with inflation. The BEP was tweaked back in 2008, but that was stopped by a previous Republican governor. And this governor has shown no interest in the BEP. He hasn't studied it, he hasn't looked at it, he hasn't invested more. He promises teacher raises and has canceled them. And so we're not having a funding formula that works, and we don't have a commissioner of education who's even talking about the BEP. Right. And that's the very mechanism that funds our schools and pays our teachers.
All right, let's get some. Yeah. Go ahead, Beth, and then we'll get some phone calls.
I was just going to say the bottom line is the funding formula is the bare minimum of what the state has to contribute. Right. They brag about fully funding the BEP knowing that it is inadequate for our schools. They can and should do more. That's the bottom line.
Let's go to the phones. Jessica's been holding on line one. Hey, Jessica, welcome.
Hello. I was curious as to how there is this abundance of funds, and can't they use that for tutoring? These children have been out of school for near a year. We had the tornado in March, and now with the snow, and then spring break coming again. This is breaking my heart as a human being, as a former educator, as just a concerned parent.
Yeah.
And I just want to know what's going to be done and where can I go to my legislature, my senator, my governor, and how do I speak out, because this is not right.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. That's good. She's asking for an action plan here. Beth, what do you say?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for the question and for being willing to advocate on behalf of your children in our communities. The reason we have so much extra money floating around, Jessica, is that our state chronically underprojects our budget totals. And so they project their spending based on, or they set their spending based on their projected revenue collections, but they're chronically under budgeting. So we have all of this extra revenue coming in, and then it's just going into a surplus. This is recurring. This happens year after year after year where the state is under budgeting. So they could be saying we're going to take money and put it into our schools, but instead they're choosing to under budget and put it into, they're basically stuffing into a mattress. They're putting into a savings account. Love the fact that you want to know who you can call and what you can do. We absolutely need every Tennessean who cares about our public schools to be reaching out to their legislators. You have a House member, you have a senator, both of them will have to be voting on the budget. We know that the governor has put out a preliminary budget, but that does not mean that that is the budget document that will pass the General Assembly. There is a lot of time between now and the end of the general session. So I would encourage you to reach out to your legislators and encourage them to invest all of this extra money, at least a portion of it, into our public schools, because as you pointed out, we have significant needs that have only grown because of the pandemic. So we had needs before, we were chronically underfunded, and our needs are only greater now that we have been experiencing this pandemic for the last year. So thank you for the question. And I would also encourage anyone to go to our TEA website or our social media accounts, because we share a lot of information that can be really helpful to you as you're having those conversations with your legislators.
Yeah, Jessica, good call. We appreciate it. Let's go to line 2 and Latrell. Hi, Latrell. Welcome. Latrell, you there?
Yes,
Hi.
I'm here.
Go ahead. What's on your mind?
Well, I would like to say thank you for all of the teachers that have done such an excellent job. They have no control of the COVID. They have no control of all these disasters. They have no control over things that are happening. All we can do is control what we can control. And as far as, I'm a native of Nashville. And for these teachers to go out here on the buses, they go from home to home. They do a lot of social work that I didn't get as a kid. They do more social work than they do educating. And they should be looked upon as heroes. They should not be looked upon or shamed or anything like that. I would like to know the legislator's name and number. I would like to know everybody else's number, because if you have a surplus, then that means that the taxes should not go up 34%. Now, I went to school, graduated from college. Something is not right here.
Yeah.
Something is not right. Now, I can add, and I can subtract, and I can divide, and all of that. Something is not right. Now, on my level, they would call it stealing. On your level, it might be government underfunding, all of these words, all of these things that they're saying. Get to the bottom line. These children need help, but these teachers should not be shamed upon. It is not their fault that this is happening, and we should come together as a city. Comfort one another, support one another, be each other's biggest fan. This is deplorable, and this is not acceptable for big city Nashville, Tennessee.
All right, Latrell, thanks so much. Definitely, you ought to sign her up to be, put her with a megaphone out in front of the state capitol, Beth. Andy, go ahead and respond to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is exactly what we were talking about with the issue of taxes. I mean, this is, you see, this is why Nashville's in court suing the state for inadequate school funding. Nashville and Memphis are the two school districts that are saying, you're not giving us enough. And she's exactly right. You wouldn't have to raise taxes 34% if the state would just do its job. We're $1.7 billion behind if you just look at the BEP formula and teachers. We're $1 billion behind if you look at the underfunding based on inflation since the Great Recession. The common denominator here is we've had two governors, Bill Haslam and Bill Lee, who have been committed to keeping public school funding low and finding ways to fund charter schools and to advance a privatization and voucher agenda. And that's not fiscally conservative. It's not fiscally conservative to pass on the 34% tax increase to the city of Nashville. I don't know what kind of conservative that is, but it's not a fiscal conservative. You might want to say that word, but they also say words like fully funding the BEP, which essentially means nothing, as Beth pointed out. And they know that. The numbers are there. The Republican comptroller said before the TASA report that we were at least $1 billion behind. Now, these are all really big numbers, but Luttrell's right to be mad. This is deplorable. We've known about this for a long time, and we've had back-to-back governors who've done nothing about it.
I'm going to read to you, here's the devil's advocate in me again, since you talked about what Governor Haslam and Governor Bill Lee have done. An article written last year in Education about that the premise of this article is that no, education spending hasn't decreased and no, more money won't fix America's schools. It says, they're talking nationally here, not Tennessee, total inflation adjusted government funding per pupil has increased by at least 39% since 1989, according to the National Center for Education Statistics. And funding at the state, local, and federal levels have also increased by at least 33% since 1989. The writer goes on to say increased spending has little, if any, relationship to improved student achievement. Now here we go to the private part and charter schools. Giving families rather than government officials control over education funding is what will make a difference long term, a fact the data clearly support. Education choice improves academic achievement, attainment, safety, satisfaction, and a host of other important outcomes in later life. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, we wouldn't need any privatization schemes if our public schools were funded at the levels that they need. You cannot tell me that being able to hire additional educators to reduce the class size ratio so that students get more one-on-one attention and instruction is not going to help students. You cannot tell me that having counselors in every school is not going to help our students. You cannot tell me you cannot tell me that having up-to-date technology and curriculum and textbooks is not going to help our students. You cannot tell me that having the best and brightest people coming into the profession and actually staying in the profession for an entire career is not going to help our students. And let's be very clear, because we are talking about big numbers, and I think that that can be confusing for people sometimes. So when we look at the governor's budget, which again was less, his total education budget for this year is less than the January surplus. So let's not forget that. But he only puts in about $200 million in recurring funds. We have 1 million public school students in the state of Tennessee. You're talking $200 per student. This is not something to brag about. And so I don't want people to get lost in these big numbers and think that it's some grand gesture from the governor, because it's not.
Right. All right. We're going to take another break. More phone calls lined up. Great discussion here, folks. You can call in at 737+. We'll be right back.